Hi Krista, today I wanted to talk to you about affirmative action. Why affirmative action? A good friend of mine sent me a message today that said, Sam, do you think that sometimes white folks don't get selected for jobs in Oregon because they're white? It's a trickier question than it sounds, because my first instinct is to say no, that never happens, don't be ridiculous. But it might happen. In fact, there might even be documented cases of that happening. But that's not the trend, is it? White folks are unemployed at a lower rate than people of color. In fact, for African Americans, their unemployment rate is double that for white Americans. And this is even more pronounced in Oregon, one of the whitest states in the country. In interview studies with human resource representatives and other people responsible for hiring, when discriminatory practices are described without labeling them as discriminatory practices, many of them respond that those practices are acceptable. Now, I'm not here to defend affirmative action as a perfect system, but there are a lot of myths and misinformation surrounding it, and the truth is that affirmative action works. So here are 5 myths and misconceptions about affirmative action that you've probably heard before, plus 5 facts that will help you to debunk them with your friends and family, and people who are wrong on the internet. Number 1, the myth. Supporting affirmative action means supporting universities and employers accepting unqualified applicants over qualified applicants. The facts. Actually, most people who support affirmative action do not support this sort of policy. Here are 4 examples of affirmative action policies from most to least popular. I don't have time to go into every affirmative action policy, but this covers our bases pretty well. First, selection among equal candidates. This means that employers, universities, other institutions could select people of color and women preferentially from a pool of equally qualified candidates. This isn't discriminatory, and mostly the public agrees. In surveys, 3/4 of the population feel that this sort of practice is not discriminatory. Second, selection among comparable candidates. This is just like selection among equal candidates, except it allows employers and other institutions to select candidates when the metrics for their potential performance are similar, not just identical, but similar. Consider, for example, the composite score on the ACT. So if a university receives 2 applicants whose scores on the ACT are 33 and 34, their projected performance does not have a statistically significant difference. Therefore, the university could consider those 2 applicants as being comparable. Third is preferential selection among unequal candidates. This enables institutions and employers to treat all candidates who are qualified as a pool and select preferentially women and people of color out of that pool. Now that's pretty uncommon, but it could theoretically happen. The 4th policy is selection of unqualified applicants. That would mean that women and people of color could be selected to fill positions for which they were not qualified, and that is explicitly prohibited by federal law. That sort of preferential treatment is not allowed. Number 2, the myth. Affirmative action means quotas. The facts. No, it doesn't. Let me read some federal regulations to you. Quotas are explicitly forbidden. Universities, employers, and other institutions are allowed to set outreach goals, which is a good idea because it ensures that the pool is as qualified and diverse as possible. That's not the same thing as a quota. Moving on. Number 3, the myth. The only way for us to become a colorblind society is for us to adopt colorblind policies. The facts. I'm going to start out with giving a big sigh, and then I'm going to do my best not to be condescending. Okay, racism and sexism are systematic. That means they impact all aspects of a person's life. The amount of money they have in their pocket, the kind of education they receive from elementary school to high school, their internship opportunities, their job opportunities, their college experiences, their networking opportunities. All sorts of things are impacted by racism and sexism. Until we address existing inequalities, accepting a colorblind society means accepting an attitude of blindness with regard to the existing systematic discrimination. So instead of ushering in an era of perfect equality, colorblind policies actually reinforce existing inequalities, and that is bad. And since I may have failed in my attempt to not be condescending, let me just add, read more about institutional discrimination. Number 4, the myth. Affirmative action hurts white men. The facts. No, it doesn't, and since I'm sure I've alienated everybody who didn't already agree with me with that last fact, let me add, but seriously though, say, for example, Barack Obama was the socialist black nationalist that conservatives purport him to be and that America really needs, and he instituted a severe policy in which every unemployed person of color would replace a white male worker. How many white Americans do you think would be unemployed by that? What % of white Americans do you think would be unemployed by that sort of a policy. Less than 2%. Now that kind of a policy, way outside the national Overton window, very extreme, not something I would advocate for. But affirmative action is a step in the right direction. Even if we took it to its extreme exaggeration of a logical conclusion, reductio ad absurdum, it would not significantly harm white American job prospects. Let's not get it twisted. White male Americans are receiving preferential treatment. Affirmative action is a non-discriminatory way to intervene in existing inequalities. Number 5, the myth. Affirmative action is a relic from a more troubled time. We might have needed it 30 years ago, but now the playing field is more or less level. The facts. Now, I'm not here to say that things haven't gotten better, but things are still pretty bad. At the height of the 1990s economic boom in 1999, over 40% of Black and Latino children were living in poverty. Median income for Black families was 60% that of white families. And in part because of colorblind seniority policies, the recession hit Black and Latino families the hardest. Saying the playing field is basically level glosses over some really serious discrepancies between white folks and people of color, and between men and women. I don't mean to sound like an extremist, but basically, if you find this situation acceptable, you're saying that those inequalities are basically fair. And not to sound like a broken record, but while affirmative action isn't perfect, it is one way for us to address these inequalities. Without it, we're not doing anything to address these inequalities. So there's my 5 myths and misconceptions and my 5 facts to debunk them. I hope that this video has been helpful. There's a lot more out there, and this is such an important topic. I encourage y'all to get educated. There's a bunch of links in the doobly-doo. A bunch of them, and you should read all of them. Then you could be an expert. And when people come at you with all the nonsense, you can give them the business. Give them the business? I sound like a little old lady without even trying. Alright, Krista, that's all I had for today. I will see you tomorrow. And now for your viewing pleasure, the dance craze that's sweeping the nation. The myth. The facts. The myth. The facts. The myth. The facts. The myth. The facts.